I'll tell you, I ran in 1974, before you were all born, as a Republican. Now, this young man right here, in shock, his head like that. I ran as a Republican, and I'll tell you why I ran as a Republican. Because in the city of Providence in those days, the Democratic Party was really to the right of Attila the Hun. It was a conservative party. And it was a conservative party because it was a machine, and it had been in existence for a long, long time, and it had controlled everything. Not a lot of minorities in the party, not a lot of, there was no room, because they all were eating off the same cow, and as a result, there was not a lot of room for anybody else. And it started to crumble because they started to fight within themselves. And so I ran for office, and I had a passion. Let me tell you the story of the city and how you can get a vision. I looked around, and we all know the story of the American city. The American city, which you're a part of, and back in the 70s and the 50s, after World War II, all the soldiers came home. And when they came home, they didn't want to live on the tenements anymore. And World War II provided a tremendous amount of manpower that returned from World War II. And they built the roads. The roads we take for granted. Route 95, 195, you hop on. They didn't exist until the 50s. And when that happened, there was a lot of displacement of people because people would, this neighborhood was number one. In Stocks Point, number two, a lot of people were displaced because of the roads. And they all moved out of the city. And the automobile was available to everybody, and demographics changed. In other words, what do I mean by that? Well, the type of people who were in the city changed. People left the cities. And who was left in the cities in the 70s were older people and an increasing number of minorities. And neighborhoods started to deteriorate. South Province, which was an old Irish neighborhood, completely kind of emptied out, and it was replaced with a minority population. And the same thing on the east side of Providence in the Fox Point neighborhood. Over where the Marriott Hotel is, you know where that is? That was all a slum area. And it was quite a challenge. And I ran. And I had a tremendous amount of passion, and I would go to the opening and they say an envelope. I'd go everywhere. And I'll never forget my first ad. Nobody knew who I was. And I'll never forget meeting with the ad people, and they said, well, no one knows who you are. I said, I understand that. I said, it's the idea to get them to know me. And the very first ad, you can see on YouTube, I think, it showed pictures of me, and it said, and the ad said, this was in April, and technology is a very important part of life. And technology then was television. That was the new thing. That was the thing that people started to use in campaigns. Television had never been used before in a mayoral race. And we used it. It was very cost ineffective because you were talking to people all over the state, not just in Providence. And so you had to pay for that, but you went down to Coventry and Cranston and Newport, but they couldn't vote for it. But you wanted to hit the people in Providence, and you had to buy the time on television, and it was expensive. And so I remember that the ad said, because no one knew me, the ad said in April we ran. And we had a big Democratic primary going, and that was the focus all on that. And so we decided that we'd have this vision, and we'd make sure that we kept the passion up, and we'd make sure we had a focus and a goal. And so we had to get known. And so I'll never forget the ad. The ad had a punchline in it. It said, you may not know who Buddy Cianci is today, but by November, he's going to look mighty good to you. And that was the punchline that people talked about all the time. And it was successful. And we didn't win by a lot of votes, but won. And ethnicity played a role in it. Everyone says, oh, you got elected because the Italians elected you. And I was Italian American. And they said it was time for an Italian to be mayor. Well, that was a bunch of hogwash, and I'll tell you why. Because I didn't carry one Italian district in the city. It was all Democratic. I carried the east side, which was extremely liberal, and I carried the black areas, the minority areas. Those are this neighborhood, these neighborhoods, the South Province neighborhood and the east side. Those are the only neighborhoods I carried. I take that back. The neighborhood I grew up in, I carried by 60 votes. Hardly a landslide. And it was because, I guess, my dad had practiced medicine there for 40 years. I guess they were voting for him, not me. So basically, that was the story of how it started. And it was strictly from having a passion to do something and change things. And the city of Providence in those days was a lot different from what it is today. Remarkably different. And you have to have, I keep talking about this vision thing. I'm going to tell you what that is. Vision is nothing, let me put it this way. You can have all the vision in the world, and without action, you know what that is? It's a daydream. And you can have all the action in the world without vision. You know what that is? A nightmare. That's what that is. So you have to be able to sift out your vision, see if you have the passion to really execute that vision, and then put the right team around you, and never let anybody say you can't do it. If anybody tells you you can't do it, then you don't want that person around you. It's good to get advice, and it's good to get people to tell you what the shortcomings are of your philosophy or your particular vision. But, you know, we can always try to take advantage of the negatives. That's what I always try to do. One of the big problems we had in Providence back in the 70s was the fact that we had a lot of old buildings. A lot of old buildings. And people said, you're going to tear those buildings down. We had no one to put in the buildings, even if we fixed them. But we had no one to occupy new buildings if we built them. Because there was a tremendous recession going on. Gas prices were high. We were on the end of every energy pipeline. The city was changing dramatically. It was emptying out. I'll give you, now, you know, about, I don't know, a couple months ago, you know, the mayor closed 9 schools, was it? 9 schools he closed? I closed, or 4 schools, 4 or 5 schools. I closed 9 schools one year, and there wasn't a peep from anybody. That shows you how the city had emptied out. There wasn't a peep from anybody. The mayor closed 4 or 5 schools, and it was a revolution. I closed 9, it didn't have a peep to show you the population, how it exited the city, and how this was before the big wave of immigration had come in with the Hispanic population and the Southeast Asians. And so the buildings, we take advantage of the negative. And the negative was we had great architecture. And other cities around the country were tearing their old buildings down. And they thought that was a wonderful thing to do. And I don't want to badmouth any other city, so I'll just give you initials, like New Haven and Hartford, which did that. And they tore everything down, and as a result, they don't have any, there's not a soul to that city. In our city, we embarked upon something called historic preservation. We had that vision. And that vision was that we would make sure that buildings were preserved, but we give developers and people who own those buildings the tools to make those buildings come alive again. And that was the hallmark of the whole administration, was to preserve older buildings. I'll tell you the buildings that they wanted to tear down. And there were people who really pushed to do it. You know the casino at Roger Williams Park? You ever been there? They wanted to tear that down. They used to be the old recreation department. I wouldn't let them do it. And then where the URI extension is downtown, the Shepherd, the old Shepherd building, they wanted to tear that down. The City Hall, they wanted to tear that down. What other buildings that they wanted to tear? I can go on and on and on. And then we had this big master plan for you know, these huge buildings being built. Who's going to fill them? Nobody. Nobody. And so we made up a hallmark of our administration out of historic preservation. And the other thing that we thought we could take advantage of to develop our economics and our economy were the arts. Because we had our school design, but we also had a very eclectic, a very different kind of population. And so we decided that we would be visionary when it came to arts. And I don't know if you know this now, but in the city of Providence, if you do something, you better do it right. And we created the very first arts district in America. Now you're going to say, that guy's crazy. What do you mean? I'm sure there are arts districts all over the place. Yeah, but we had the first one that did one thing. That if you were an artist and you lived downtown in that certain district, where Providence Performing Arts Center is and Trinity Repertory Company and AS 220, if you live there or you work there, you don't pay any state income taxes. You don't pay any sales taxes on what you sell. You can be an artist and make something. And you can develop it, you can, whether you're a sculptor or a painter, whatever you are, there's no sales tax that's paid on that. And there's no income tax on the artist, state income tax. And that was very innovative, and it brought about a lot of interest. And it also occupied buildings. And then we, you know, you talk about being passionate about something. You don't remember this, but in the city of Providence, where you know where the State House is, and you also know where the old railroad station was. Union Station, you know where that is? You know well, behind Union Station were a bunch of railroad tracks. That was all railroad tracks. Because you look at the history of the city, we were tremendously involved in textiles, and we were an industrial center many years ago. We were like one of the capital industrial areas of the country. All the uniforms for the Civil War were made here. This was the foundation of the Industrial Revolution right here. The mills were humming. The jewelry industry was being manufactured. 1/3 of all, 2/3 of the costume jewelry in America And all that was fed into a wonderful industrial complex. But it required transportation, it required railroads. And so the railroads were behind that railroad station. There were tracks that just went for miles. And they separated the city of Providence main area, the central business district, from the State House. And there was a railroad trestle that ran right through, you couldn't even see the State House. And so we decided that we should move those railroad tracks. And that was a gutsy thing to do because it didn't have a lot of support and it required a lot of money. And when I first was mayor, I considered myself to be a social worker because of the economic times. We built community centers and we gave food stamps out and we built homes for the elderly, all those kinds of things. And the second time I was mayor, or the second part of my mayoralty, because I was mayor over 4 years, was to, over the course of 4 years, not for the whole 4 years. But then I decided that we should be a risk taker. If you're going to do anything, you're going to be a risk taker. And if you're not a risk taker, you're not going to get anywhere. And so, regardless of what polls say or what the naysayers say, if you have a vision and you think it can get done, you can do it if you have the right people around you. And so we decided that we would move the railroad tracks. Now that was a huge undertaking. And then, when we got halfway through moving the tracks, we decided, did you know that, you know where Crawford Street is? You know where Waterfire is along Southern Water Street? That was the biggest, widest bridge in the world. The Crawford Street Bridge. If you look at the Guinness Book of Records, that was the widest bridge in the world. And it was there that they covered over the waterways. And so halfway through that project, we decided we would not only move the railroad tracks, but we also would move 3 rivers: the Providence, the Shastic, and the Woonasquatucket rivers. They sound like close credit unions, okay? But they're rivers that ran through our city, because everybody wants water, right? And I remember, and don't dismiss having casual conversations with people who have ideas. There's a guy named Bill Warner, who was an architect. He used to have lunch for once in a while. And he said, you know, man, you should really, those rivers ought to be relocated. And I said, what's this guy, nuts? And we had a couple of drinks and lunch in those days. And he'd draw on a napkin what he thought the city would look like. And so I gave him a small amount of money, about $25,000, and he redesigned or designed what that ought to look like. And then the rest is history. We decided that we would uncover that bridge, relocate the rivers, and opened up a tremendous space for redevelopment, which now we became, the third part of my mayoralty was being an entrepreneur. So there was a social worker part, then there was a risk taker part, and then there was the entrepreneurial part, which was the last 5 or 6, 8 years in office. And that's when we decided that we would go hardwired. Remember, I told you the demographic had changed, people had moved out of the city, the downtown was dead, and we lost all our retail. And so we said we're going to recapture retail in 1 generation. And that's when we built the Providence Place Mall. And that was the story of, that was the biggest risk we ever took, because it was the biggest project that we'd ever undertaken. And the financing of it was very difficult, because we had to build the garages and the road systems and the utility relocations and all that. It was all in the context of relocating the railroad tracks and also relocating the rivers. So that was the most visionary thing we ever did that had a focus and had a tremendous amount of follow-through. And it was responsible for really reinvigorating and revitalizing the city. So it was, but there's a lot of other things that go to it if you're going to be an entrepreneur. You always have to have another part, another dimension to all of that, and that has to be something called branding. And branding is something that I believe in. To get into business, you ought to remember that, because you got people that know who you are. And I guess if you're in politics, there should be a rule you follow, and the same thing in business. Never let anybody define you. It's up to you to define who you are. If you let someone define you, then they're going to determine who you are. And really, you ought to be determining who you are. And that's what we did with the city of Providence. We weren't going to let anybody else define us. And so we went on a tremendous program to define who we were. And who were we? We were an eclectic, diverse population of tremendous depth and cultural advantage that other cities didn't have, number one. Number two, so you could develop that into what? Restaurants. And because we were building a convention center, And we decided that we would, if we were going to build this convention center that cost millions of dollars to us, and build the city-owned Western Hotel at one point, we owned it with the state. You had to, because now that we did all this stuff, we had to develop an industry, and so it was the tourism industry. And we had everything that went with it. We had the water fire that we developed, I mean, Barnaby developed for us. We had historic buildings, but we had to have places to eat. And the last person that a banker wants to see walk into the bank looking for a loan is who? A restaurateur. Guy walks into a bank and says, I want to open a restaurant. The banker says, I got no time for you. Because they're risky, number one. Number two, you probably don't have a lot of collateral to put up. And so when I saw that we weren't developing the restaurants, I said, well, you know what, we're going to go in the restaurant business. And so we drew down a lot of federal money from our community development program, created our own bank, and we loaned the money out to restaurateurs. Didn't need the banks. And we loaned the money out at 1%, sometimes 0. And we would attach the liquor license to the building so they couldn't run off with the liquor license on us. And that's how Federal Hill developed with all its great restaurants. All those restaurants up there, that's how a lot of them started. Whether it's Mediterranean or Vender Ravioli or Costantino's or Capriccio downtown or Cafe Nouveau, those are all city-sponsored city restaurants that began when we developed that program. And not one of them ever went under. I think one of them went under. We lost nothing on the program. And what's the idea of that with a vision? It's number one, supplementing an industry, a tourism industry. Number two, fixing buildings and having people to put in them. And number three, you're sharing in the taxes, aren't you? Not only the property taxes that were being paid before, but you're also getting the sales taxes on the food and the service, and you're also employing people and getting the income taxes. So that's the whole thought process that went with that industry. And it's grown, and it's a great industry. In fact, it's a destination. People from all over come here to visit our restaurants. And then, of course, you see, when I was mayor, there was five things I focused on. Number one, there's only, when you go into a business, or you go into politics, or no matter what you do, you're going to define what your goals are. And your goals are, and don't go past them. In other words, don't take on more than your responsibility requires. Not that you can't move on and explore things, but if you have a job, understand what it is. Number one, I felt that if you're any mayor, just has to do 5 things. 5 things, and if you'd be a great mayor, or a great executive, or a great leader, if you define what your things are that you have to do. And I thought there were 5 things that had to be done if you were mayor. Number one, the city had to be safe. If the city weren't safe, then no one was going to come to you. Number two, if you didn't have a good education system, no one was going to stay in it. I think we kind of did all right there, we could do better. Number three, someone had to have a job so we could pay the taxes. So you had to create jobs. And number 4, you had to have an affordable place to live, housing. And number 5, a recreational and cultural atmosphere that really wanted people to, that encouraged people to stay and gave the city soul. So that's what I thought my job was. And that's when we created community policing. For the police department, we built the new public safety building downtown, Service Road 7 there. And also did a lot of the housing in this neighborhood. And I think it made a lot of difference. I'll never forget when I first was elected mayor, the very first night the animals escaped from the zoo, the monkeys, over here in Rogers Park. And they called me and said, what should you do? Because when you're mayor, you're chairman of the Parks Commission, too. So I would do what you normally do when the monkeys escape. I don't know what you do when the monkeys escape. So that gave us the impetus to recreate that whole zoo and make it one of the best zoos around. Do you know what the biggest tourist attraction in the state of Rhode Island is? You might think it's the Newport Mansions, or you might think it's one of those things. It isn't. It's the Rogers Park Zoo. That's the biggest tourist attraction. That's the most people that come into the city each and every year from outside the state. So that was an important thing. We also embarked upon things like saving Trinity Repertory. Of course, we also embarked upon the saving of the PPAC. And I'll tell you why Proudly Performing Arts Center is a success. They wanted the guy who owned that building back in the 70s was a guy named B.A. Dario. And he wanted to tear it down. It was called the Ocean State Theater. And to be entrepreneurial about it, some businessman called me and said, he's going to tear the theater down. Can you go see him? So I probably didn't die, so I went to see him. And he was adamant he was going to tear the building down. And I met him the night before Easter, whatever year it was, 77, 78. And he was going to tear it down. He opened it to P-Pack, I went down, Performing Arts Center downtown. Well, they were on a level, like he already owned an RKO Albee Theater, he already knocked that one down. And so we decided that the city would be involved in it. There's a whole long story that goes with it. You can read about it in my book if you want to get my book. But wouldn't let him tear it down. We finally bought it with a group of business people, and the city put a lot of money in that. And we knocked the back wall out so we could have tremendous shows come in, and it was a long process. But the key, it's a non-profit, but the key, another lesson, is pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. Don't be a hog. In order to get the personnel to run that theater, we had to get the best in the country, and we did. But they're not going to work for wages that a nonprofit pays. So even though the theater is nonprofit, we gave them the ability to develop a for-profit company that is housed right at the Performing Arts Center downtown, but it manages about 12 theaters around America. Big ones in Atlanta, Florida, Chicago, and so the headquarters is right here in Providence, and so they have a private our own theater is non-profit, but the theater operation is for-profit that runs theaters outside, and that's why we get the kind of plays we get here. That's the old theory, you know, if you want to go to Cleveland and you want to go to wherever you want to go, you better come to Providence or you ain't going there. So unless shows are put together, Lynn Singleton does a great job down in Allen Chile. They're the kind of people who really made that thing happen, and they do excellent. And that's why that theater is a success, because of the personnel that run it, and the flexibility of having them with their own operation to make our theater. All we wanted was theater, and we got it. We got one of the best ones, but they can afford to do it because they run, I don't know, 8, 10 theaters around the country, whatever it is, it varies. But anyway, so those are the kinds of things that happen. And branding, give you an example. You know, when you start a business, let people know who you are, you define yourself. Branding is important. Whenever they wanted to whenever we did something in the city, for instance, the ballet, Rhode Island Ballet wanted to come to the city, and they wanted some money, so we fronted them some money. But I said, if you're going to come to Providence, it's going to be Providence, Ballet Providence, it's not going to be Rhode Island Ballet. When we built the mall, they wanted to call it the Capital City Mall. I said, no, we're not putting this kind of dough in and calling it the Capital City Mall. It's going to be the Providence Mall, Providence Place Mall, that's what it's going to be. And we brought the hockey team here, they wanted to call it the Providence Jewelers. And I said, no, can't do that. And so we actually stole that team from Portland, Maine. And we got it here because we wanted to fill the Civic Center on Sunday nights. And we made a deal that they couldn't refuse. We rented the Civic Center to them for $2,500 a game. What a long-term contract, but we also got 40% of the gross of the concessions. That's why popcorn costs $12. So never forget, so our end really depended a lot on their winning games. You know, I remember I used to call Harry Sinton and I'd say, these guys are playing because they would lose some games, but they had a good team, but sometimes they would lose like 4 in a row. So I called Harry Sinton, who was the manager of the Bruins, and I'd say, it's like you do something crazy. You were losing games, and the gross is down, we're losing money. And I said, why don't you put a woman on the ice or something? You know, to draw a crowd. He said, I thought I had 5 of them on the ice already, because he would send the players down to play, those players at least. So one day, I'll tell you a funny story. One day, they had like 3 goalies that got hurt. And the fire department had a guy in the fire department that was kind of a professional, he could play professional hockey. And he was a goalie. And so they called me from the Bruins and they said, do you mind if we took a firefighter and put him in as a goalie? You know, because he's a firefighter. And so I said, no, I do draw a big crowd, the whole thing, because he was a great hockey player. But he wasn't a hockey player, he was a firefighter. So I'll never forget, at the end of the conversation, I said, Harry, I don't mind you using the Providence firefighter, but you know what? I don't think the Providence Bruins or the Boston Bruins can afford a Providence firefighter. So I thought, but it's an inside joke. Anyway, As time went on, the city of Providence became well-known. And we branded everything, whether it was Performing Arts Center, they can't change the name of the Performing Arts Center. It used to be Ocean State, because when we gave them the last check, which was for the seats, we had them change the bylaws, that if they ever change the name of the Providence Performing Arts Center, they have to give us all our money back, which is $1 million, so that'll never happen. So it's all in branding, it's defining your goals, it's having a focus on what you really and truly want to do in life, and obviously it's having a passion to do it. And I guess if there's people ask me, the years you were mayor, what are the biggest contributions that you ever made with the mall, relocating rivers, or building this or building that? No, none of that. None of it. You know what it really was? It was taking the self-esteem of the people of Providence in 1974, that was the lowest it could possibly be, and raising that self-esteem to levels they never thought they could achieve. Self-esteem, raising the self-esteem. When you do that, it's almost anything you can get done. And the biggest quality I think that anybody really needs to have is perseverance. If you fall down, get yourself up again, dust yourself off, and just keep going. And don't let anybody keep you down. That's it. Just the perseverance is the big thing. My favorite politician is Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill was a guy who, didn't live the greatest of lifestyles. I guess he drank a quart of cognac a day during World War II, lived in a bunker, but was a pretty quick-witted guy, and also was quite a tactician and strategist. And there's a famous story about him. After World War II was over, Cambridge University invited him to speak, I think it was Cambridge, and to all their students, thousands of them, hundreds of them. And the title of the speech was supposed to be, How I Won World War II. So he walked in, sat down on the dais, and then he introduced him. He got up, he took his little derby off, put it on the dais. He took the cigar out of his mouth, the stogie, and put it on the dais. And then he took his umbrella and put it on the side. He looked at the audience and he said, never, 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 never give up. Put his hat on his head, put his stogie in his mouth, put his umbrella, walked to his chair and sat down with thunderous applause. And to me, that's how life is. Never give up. You can go down, you can be up, you can be down, but never believe your own press clippings. When you stop doing that, it's time for failure. And never, if anybody puts you down, keep going, because when you get on top, people are always going to shoot at you, so keep moving. And avoid a lot of the stuff. I've had my ups and my downs, but I have a lot of fun today. I do radio, 3 to 6 every day, and on AM and FM, I do New York television every week. I do every other week, I guess. I do, just wrote a book, and it's been successful. Sold the movie rights to Tribeca, which is Robert De Niro and Jay Rosenthal's company. I do television every day, which I have to be at in a little while. I love it because it's called The World According to Buddy. I love it. So I can say it I want, doing it I want. And I do other business, I do other things also. So, but it's been a great ride. I've been up, I've been down, I've been all over, but I've enjoyed it. I've slept in prison. I've also slept at the Windsor Castle. I've also been to the White House. I've been as a guest. I've been everywhere. And I'm forever grateful to the people of Providence for giving me that opportunity. I was mayor 6 times in the city, and never regretted one day of it. And I think I left the city better than when I found it. And that's the story. So vision, focus. Never let anybody define who you are. Don't be afraid to take a risk, and you'll find yourself successful if you. And if you wander off the path, get right back on it. Don't let anybody tell you that you're a bad guy or you're wrong. Pick yourself up and keep